Good morning, everybody. Welcome to concurrent session number 10, Precarity and Racism, Upward Mobility in Academia. I first want to acknowledge that I'm moderating this panel from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We pay respect to all Indigenous people from all nations across Canada.
And then there you go. Bye-bye.
Winnie, could you mute yourself?
Winnie, you're going to turn on your camera and then you're going to be live for everybody. Enjoy your session.
Yeah, and
Winnie,
do not click anything. Do not click anything more.
Press the mute button on the bottom of your screen.
Bye.
Winnie, could you press the mute button at the bottom of your screen, please? Winnie, can you hear me? Okay, I apologize. I just want to continue by saying that we acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and honor their courageous leadership, past and present. So before we begin, I also wanted to let everyone know that this space at the National Forum is inclusive and safe. And by participating in today's event, you're agreeing to recognize our starting point, acknowledging and recognizing that we must strive to overcome historical and divisive biases, treat everyone with dignity and respect.
yeah, Natalie.
Hi, Winnie. Can you hear all the panelists?
No.
Okay. On the very bottom, you're going to click speaker.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Hey, Natalie. Winnie.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. I click speaker. Yeah.
Winnie, can you mute yourself? All right, I'm just gonna keep going. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Hey, Natalie.
We're also agreeing to be open to learning, recognizing that the best way to understand the choices, actions, or intentions of one another is by asking questions. We also agree to care for ourselves and each other, acknowledging that heavy conversations can impact our mental, spiritual,
and there's
emotional, physical
Yes.
well-being, and that it's okay to ask for help and support.
Yeah, I got the camera speaker. I clicked the speaker as you instructed.
Can you hear them now?
No.
Okay, I apologize for the overlapping noise. I'm just going to introduce all of you to our esteemed speakers. As we all know, work in academia,
You don't need to answer me.
universities are often done by precarious workers, by persons who are not tenure track or have permanent
when you're on
employment in a university. And so I want to introduce our panelists.
You
The
should
first
see
is
a little
Dr. Angie Wong,
upward.
an adjunct professor with the Department
Not
of
if that's
Learning
correct.
at Lakehead University. Angie Wong is a Chinese-Canadian theorist who engages the intersection of
Do you
history
see
and
speaker?
memory,
Not if you see
understand
speaker.
legacies
on
of
the bottom.
colonialism and the contemporary
Okay,
relationship between
At the
Asian
bottom.
Canadian
Okay, great.
representation.
Does it
in
have a
Canadian
cross
state.
across it?
Secondly, I want to
Okay, so
introduce
I want you to
Dr.
click
Satoru
that.
Nakagawa,
One time.
is a contract instructor in Asian Studies at the University of Manitoba and
Can
a
you
contract
hear them?
instructor in education at the University of Ottawa.
Not across.
Dr. Nakagawa
If you're
is
live and they can hear you. So
from
that's why I was like,
Tokunoshima,
don't talk yet. Yeah.
Japan. He has a PhD
It's okay.
in Indigenous Peoples Education from the
You're
University
gonna
of
need to.
Ottawa,
You're gonna need to go back
on
to the
language,
screen.
culture,
Right along
and
the bottom.
identity. He explores his work through community-based
See the
research
speaker.
and specializes in
Not
Indigenous
if you see
language,
speaker button.
revitalization,
When you
orality,
pressed it,
ethics,
did the
language
cross
teaching, and
go right?
educational sociology.
Okay. And you still cannot hear them, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. They can hear you. So what I'm gonna do is let's see. You should hear them.
Third, I want to introduce
beside the
Dr.
speaker button,
Ing, who is having
you
technical
see the
difficulties
little
right now. I
arrow.
hope that she'll be able to join us
Not
in
if you see
her
it.
fashion. She is the immediate past
The little
Unifor National
speaker button
Chair
that
in
you just
Social
clicked
Justice
should
and
turn blue.
Democracy at X
Do
University.
you see that?
She's a labor rights
Is there a little
activist
arrow that points
with a
upward.
commitment to anti-racism,
Okay, click
equity,
that.
and work empowerment.
And then there should be a drop
Her
down that
research
comes up
focuses on
with 3
reimagining
options.
from a decolonizing and anti-racism
Right.
perspective,
There are only 2.
and the physical and mental health impact of global labor market restructuring, plant
Okay,
closure, and
no
job
problem.
precarity on racialized
So,
immigrants,
You're going to
and
click the other one, whatever that's not clicked on
other
right now.
women workers.
All good.
We also have with us
I believe in you.
Dr. Habiba Zaman. She is a
I'm
professor
here.
in the Department of Gender, Sexuality,
So you're going to
Women's
click the other
Studies at
one,
Simon
whatever
Fraser
wasn't
University.
selected. Not if you've got that
She is
done.
an honorary research associate of the
Okay.
Center of
I'm
India,
watching you
Center
right
for
now.
India and South Asian
And then
Research
does
at
the speaker
UPC.
thing
Her
still have a cross
interests
across it?
include migration of Bengalis to Canada,
Okay. Can you
history,
hear them now?
development, identity, and activism.
Okay.
Asian immigrants into Canada, breaking the iron wall,
No
decommodification,
problem.
immigrants from the
You're the
middle,
one that's
served as a member of South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy. We also have with us Sharoni Mitra, president of CUPE 3906. Sharoni is the president of CUPE Local 3906. She represents contract academic workers at McMaster University, where there are graduate student and workers in labor studies. Her research endeavors have related to worker organizing, gender, race, care work, and resource communities. So I want to welcome this very well-esteemed and panel of researchers. Their work is very exciting, and they're best situated to talk about the topic of the day today, which is precarity in academia. So I first want to start our discussion by looking at a series of questions that each of our panelists have had time to contemplate on. And the first question I have is, in what way or ways have you seen anti-Asian racism impact the growth and development of precarious workers in higher education? And I would like to invite Dr. Nakagawa to answer this question at the end.
Thank you very much for introduction and the land acknowledgement. And we do respect the people who came before us, who used to live here before. And I would like to start my answer question. Yes, my name is Satoru, and I am from the Indigenous Amani. This is the point that they kind of, right? I'm going to come back later. Hopefully, I have enough time. Indigenous Amani. Well, I'm a contact sessional instructor, which means that I teach post by post, year by year. And that's what I do. And I do have a PhD in Indigenous People's Education, University of Alberta, as the moderator explained. And yeah, I have a lot of background on teaching as well as the research going on. U15 workload research is going on right now, and I have the Global Indigenous Learning project going on as well. So my position is sort of like as the question poses, that the precarious work life. It's kind of like this describes me, who I am. So I would like to go on, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that what we talk about Indigenous. Even I can get to that point, I want to talk about the foundational sort of like I'm not going to cover everybody with the one stroke of a brush, but I would say that at least me, that even though I don't really believe in it, but I think I've been influenced by Confuciusness, that rolling with the big power, don't object to it, and don't rebel it, and you just go along, and you just don't talk back, and you go a long way. That's what I've been taught, consciously or subconsciously, and that's what I brought to Canada when I came to Canada when I was 24 years old. So yesterday, the session was happening, and the third part, the plenaries yesterday was talking about we need to talk about the structure of the institution and what happening, and where the money goes, fundings, and what is the tenure track is all about. And of course, I do like to have a tenure track, but there's something I'm going to tap into it. And even my transgender daughter talked about it at the university, is that as a colonial superpower, I was like, oh, okay, my kid, kind of interesting point. Yes, and I agree. And we talked about it that dismantling the master's house. In my mind, we can do that, but we have to create the new tools to build the new house. If we continue to use the same tool, we're going to end up to have exactly the same tool. That's what I thought I would just throw in. We're talking about the structure. What's Precarious is that I did go back yesterday and rechecked the information. What I did is that I looked over the Asian studies, who is on the head. And when I look at the Indigenous studies or the Native studies or even the African studies, I see specific bases, specific background, specific genetics patterns, which is not the sort of, I don't like to say white faces, because that's not the issue is, but we do see in Asian studies, non-Asian descendant faces. Right? Some people say, you have to say white faces, but that becomes the off topic, and we don't want to blame anybody else. So that kind of like interesting. If you're wondering, you should go and check who's on the head of the Asian studies or Asian related studies. Funny thing is, it does show up. So that's something that the structure itself is going, and it's that the overwhelming that most of the teaching professors or instructors or the teaching staff or the sessionals are mostly the immigrants or the Asian descendants. And of course, those who hold the professorial rank or the distinguished professors, all those things are not so much held by the Asian studies or the Asians, what we call, right? That's kind of like interesting. So sometimes when I do apply for the jobs, and sometimes I would like to say often, but sometimes I have more publication than the department head. I have more grants than the department head. I have more teaching experience than the department head, but I don't get a job, right? That's kind of, to me, it's precarious, but hey, just gonna leave it like that. And maybe I'm gonna go on further and say, maybe I'm not orientalized enough. Maybe that's the issue, but that defeats the whole purpose of being Asian studies or doing a study, right? So anyway, I'm not gonna go any further than that. And of course, on that term, even this conference, you can see at the top and the right corner, there's a Shiseido and Takeda, and there's another sign keep coming up, which is the funding, right? That's where the money comes from. Takeda is pharmaceutical company from Japan. Shiseido is the beauty product of Japan, and world renowned. Without that, this wouldn't happen. So funding becomes the issue. And when we look at many of the Asian studies, funding comes from the government, comes from the private sectors, right? And who can bring that money? And that trickle down to one of my research that U15 workload, one of the participants said, I'm the sessional instructor. My institution is asking me to fundraise my course so that I can teach that course, right? So there is a good thing about the fundraising. And of course, the minimum requirement student number is there as well. So if this individual doesn't hit that number, the funding goes away, and he doesn't get to talk about it. Teach the class. So that's kind of like, again, precarious. Some people are suffering, some people are taking advantage, and where do we draw a line? So that's kind of thing that I wanted to talk about. And going back to sort of like Confucius, right? Well, I've been taught that I have to respect the elder. So I do. Whoever comes before me, I do respect, and I give them a long way of respect. But sometimes it doesn't really happen. But let's talk about yesterday's talk. We're sort of like unifying the Asian identity in the single and the vast and monolithic identities we're talking about, and still we're talking about within the Asian and against the Asian Canadian. So there is a vast unifying abilities happening, and there's division, and not many people speaker were sort of like my part of as well, that the first immigrant. So that's something that I thought that was very, very interesting. And we talked about it. Who is Asian? Then I like to throw some, thoughts for food. There's three sort of like things that we talked about. You kind of have to look like Asian. So who decides what is supposed to look like Asian, right? Then second thing we talked about it, who can maneuver through this system and who can go around and operate really smoothly. So that relates to how long you've been here, you how know the system, how long. So that's where I sort of like talked about it, orientalized, right? That's another factor comes in. And another factor we sort of talked about it, but we didn't really talk about it, is how well you speak English, right? In that part, within that we have a hierarchy system, who's going to be at the top or not. And even by the CQ, the student evaluation, I turn on, because we're on a Zoom, and I turn on the transcribing, so that those people who requires listening difficulty or all sorts of things. Then I got the CQ coming back and saying, this professor is nice because he knows he's got an accent that we don't understand him. Well, that's not what I said. That's not what I expected. But there's assumption already happening, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But I take that as a compliment. So I go with it, and I don't get to normally finish my conversation. I say that because Asians say something, and we sort of go around, and the final point is at the end, boom, right? But before I get to there, whatever I'm talking about, setting up the stage, somebody comes in and start arguing with me, setting up the stage, and I don't get to finish. That's often happens. So whoever speak louder and faster gets in front of me, and I don't get to say. And of course,
Dr. Nakagawa, perhaps we can pause here and come back to your thoughts again later. But thank you for introducing some very important concepts.
Okay.
Just on the barriers to accessing academia, like you said, some alarming experiences on your part, having to fundraise for your own course to teach. Being perceived by your students in various ways, having the credentials of teaching grants and research, and yet, as you said, not being orientalized enough to be teaching or having a permanent place in Asian studies, for example. I wonder now if we could, move to, a second question, and I'll call on Sharoni Mitra to answer this. What challenges do precarious education workers face in upward mobility? And we just, listened to Dr. Nakagawa talk about the various barriers that he himself has experienced in his observations. And I wondered if you could speak more specifically about this upward mobility, Sharoni.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, Jamie, and for your work moderating. Of course, the challenges for precarious education workers are multifold, that we've just heard. And I also want to say the wording of this question with upward mobility is quite telling. And I am speaking as a unionist. I prioritize conceiving of these dynamics in collective terms. So I'm going to have to reframe this and focus on a higher standard for contract education workers holistically, right? So rather than thinking of precarity as a barrier to rise up the ranks without questioning said ranks, of course, current models of academia are particularly hierarchical and competitively individualistic in terms of structure and culture, both of which are informed by white supremacy. And I think in conceiving this more holistically, how can we create a more stable and cohesive workforce, and one in which all workers can access a better quality and standard of work that aligns with the transformative potential of teaching and research? And to me, this is a conception that's the opposite of neoliberal universities, in which a flexible workforce is forcefully created and maintained. But to answer the question and to be a bit more specific about those challenges, and perhaps to complement what we've just heard, overarchingly, precarious work has negative implications on health and quality of life. To me, this is a major problem, and we know that bodies and minds are affected by precarity in employment. Then, of course, there's endemic levels of unpaid work, unequal pay for equal work within and between universities. We see contract professors spending more time teaching, and then research is often downloaded to personal and more unpaid time, and this has an effect on career prospects as well. And within those heavier teaching workloads, racialized instructors will face more resistance and harassment from students and colleagues, and they'll also receive the least amount of support in navigating those types of problems. And lastly, I'd say the politics of hiring can worsen for precarious workers, and that issue is left with a lesser level of accountability as well. And to speak on the workplace fragmentation and implications of precarious work, I see that universities, my own university and employer, McMaster, they straight up disrespect sessional faculty and contract workers, even though these are the workers that keep our schools running. I've seen this in person, I've seen it in bargaining, I hear it from my fellow members all the time. So there really is a level of marginalization. And this, of course, intersects with other factors like race and gender for who's overly concentrated in these positions. And on a similar topic, there can be deep divisions and a disheartening lack of solidarity from tenure-track professors towards sessionals. There's also divisions between full-time and part-time contractors. So these are some of the challenges faced by these workers.
Thank you, Sharoni. So concise and very, I would say, powerful, because you know, in my own work is in immigration, various work is in a wide variety of contexts, and I feel like there's a lot of similar threads and overlap with regards to the way that people are remunerated, the way that people are valued, the impact it has on people's health, the kinds of harassment and marginalization that they experience. So thank you for sharing that. I wondered if you could begin to answer our third question that posed to the panel today is, how can we ensure the protection of employees in this sector from the precarity of their work in academia? You know, drawing on what you've just identified as the experiences, the common, I would say, symptoms of precarity. What can we do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that precarity shifts the ground upon which workers stand, and it does make it more difficult to act collectively. So it's challenging, but I wouldn't say it's unfeasible to build labor power. And I really think prioritizing this relates to the politicization of material conditions in universities and the ways in which politics is actually integral to all academic commitment. So in terms of some more specifics, something basic and practical is we need to push for transparency on numbers on contract positions in departments and courses. We need to build awareness of how universities are run amongst the public. I really do believe that people can respond when they're made aware of how things actually function. And I know that universities purposely hide these kinds of numbers to obscure the fact that they totally rely on contract workers. And therefore, contract work is integral to the school's functioning, right? Ideally, workers with more power and leverage, aka tenure faculty, would directly support and be in solidarity with those in less power. So there's questions of building relationships and solidarity at play as well. I do think there's a lot of merit for contract profs to be unionized in the same union as tenured faculty, because we don't see this so often. I also think that localized bargaining worsens inequities. So negotiating only by university and only according to job type, I don't think this is really serving the strategy that we need compared to something more sectoral in terms of bargaining approach. And my final point on the kind of labor strategy is we need deeper and more strategic organizing to renew and to reclaim the mandate of universities as public institutions, right? It really is a transformative site for the pursuit of knowledge, and that means building power on the ground and being able to exercise a genuine threat of disruption to win some gains, both in your working conditions and to organize against ongoing impositions of austerity, right? Which is actually the wider conditions that drive the normalization of precarious workers in schools. So in terms of more specific gains, I'd love to see a huge influx of public funding and to also reorganize universities in ways that honor working and learning conditions. And we also know that universities involve an array of stakeholders, whether that's students to community members and other types of workers. So this would be an important opportunity for coalition building as well. And I also wanted to speak a little more on the topic of anti-Asian racism directly. You know, there's rightfully a new focus on this issue, as exemplified by the panel we're at right now. But there are some critical considerations on new opportunities that we might be seeing. So I just want to warn of liberal representation and surface level inclusion that throws money and attention at problems without challenging the structure at hand. Right, so we might be seeing more funding opportunities in Asian studies, which of course has its place, but we also need to remember the radical history and the real and enduring struggle that's taken place for Asian studies and other areas of so-called ethnic studies to even establish themselves in school, right? And lastly, I'd like us to consider and respond to anti-Asian racism beyond academia, because we know that wider data shows high levels of income disparity and poverty within Asian communities. And we're not a monolith. And there are concentrations of low-income work, and we really can't ignore those workers and their communities. Knowing that there's a deep history in Settler Canada of Asian oppression based on immigration policy, based on labor policy, and a historical connection with precarious work. And knowing that concurrently, the model minority myth, sort of this incorrect idea that Asians perform relatively well under white supremacist capitalism, is also linked to anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity. So I don't want conversations on Asian oppression to be siloed, and I'd just like to reiterate that no question of racial liberation is a zero-sum game. Yeah, thank you. Those are my various thoughts on the topic.
Thank you, Sharoni. Thank you for those very concrete recommendations too, in terms of transparency, creating more awareness about what the actual, the work that precarious workers in universities, and calling on tenured and permanent faculty members to do more and doing more strategic organizing. I want to invite Dr. Winnie in to provide her thoughts on what kinds of things can be done, and her ideas on that front.
Sure. Thanks very much, Jamie. I think I just want to reinforce a couple of points that Sharoni has made on terms of labor strategy. And in a way, what we've seen under the new liberal agenda, the places of higher learning, it's no different from any other regular workplaces preoccupied with productivity, in quote, output, sustainability, and revenue generating activity. So in that sense, I'm sure, reinforcing what previous speakers have mentioned, contractual part-time faculty members, sessional instructors are as akin to the PSW in the healthcare sector, right? They travel from workplaces to workplaces, cover up enough courses, enough income just to alive. And in that sense, where does one find time to do research, writing, publications, which is a necessary yardstick for promotions, for jobs security and employment in the higher learning, in post-secondary sector. So in reinforcing some of these points, I think these are systemic issues that we need to tackle it in a more strategic and systematic manner. I like the point Sharoni raised about the collaboration, and I used to coin the 3 C's: collaboration, collective bargaining, and creativity to break the precarity in academia. We need a pathway where racialized part-time faculty members can transition into LTF, full-time faculty tenure track. And in that sense, collective bargaining and collaborations among faculty associations and the various unions representing part-time faculty members should take place. In particular, faculty associations that represent members that have more security, more power. There should be a stream that would ensure that there's equity hiring so we can break the silos and quote unquote the self-interest bargaining. The other piece is, aside from this, the hiring process and the review process of the tenure track faculty members are highly political and problematic. The gatekeeping culture is alive and well entrenched. And in that sense, post-secondary institutions can even be more insidious and competitive. There's a network operates in secrecy, right? Whose voice, whose research is more value, who has been been excluded, and who has been assessed as less valued, right? In one university that should remain nameless, in one single year, 3 out of the 5 faculty members denied tenure track were racialized women. And to me, this is not a coincidence, it's a pattern. It requires a major cultural shift to dismantle what Galabuzzi refers as the economic apartheid in the workplace, and that the white male superiority and the presence of, and then we also need more the presence of a critical mass of racialized members within each department, so we won't be tokenized. And then last, just one more point is, I think it's important to shift from silence or being silenced to solidarity. When candidates deny job opportunities or tenure, they end up enduring the anguish, the shaming alone. And there's such a cone of silence. I'm sure you all understand what I'm saying, silence and secrecy, that to me, it's even more rampant than other workplaces. It's seen as an individual problems. There's no probing, questioning whether there's a pattern. And to me, I think this is where the unions and faculty associations need to take a different approach. We need to move away from silencing secrecy to solidarity. I think the whole slogan on the anti-apartheid slogan, an injury to one is an injury to all, should be practiced in higher learning places to build that collective strength. If we can take an example to, the support for survivors of sexual violence, that no expression, we believe. Why can't we extend that same approach to, instructors, faculty members, survivors of racial violence and discriminations? The union leadership and grievance officers should be extending that similar type of compassion and support when racialized members come forth with a complaint. We don't need to end up having to prove our case to the administration as well as to the union that is supposed to represent us. So, because in a process that appears to be natural, the outcomes and trends, if the outcomes and trends are so often come out against us, something is wrong. So I guess I just want to push in terms of 3 points. I think it's important that each post-secondary institution should conduct an annual equity audit. We have enough lip service, and I think it's important the administration leadership and union leadership put in adequate resources to ensure that action plans are made. I don't think we need to be at another table that do consultations and advisory. There need to be a plan of action to move forward. Last but not the least, I think we need both qualitative and quantitative research on the systemic inequalities between precarity and anti-Asian racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-Indigenous racism. That those should be collected so we have more data, more justifications. They don't believe what we say. Those are personal anecdotes. But once we have the data, we can effect change, clear the path for a new generation of scholars and role models within our Asian Canadian community, as well as of the broader racialized and Indigenous communities. So the access and the outcomes would balance and reflect the diversity of our communities as well.
Thank you, Dr. Winnie Ng. Those are very, very thoughtful. I really like your catchphrases, the 3 C's, collaboration, collectivity, and creativity, and your push from silence to solidarity. It was a very powerful ways to depict some concrete ways to move forward. I want to move now to a slightly different question. What can be done to address the interconnectedness of precarious work and racism in universities? And all of you have already talked about this in a variety of ways. And I wondered if I could invite Dr. Angie Wong to begin answering this question.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you everyone else who's already spoken. It's great to be a part of this panel. I'd just like to start off by saying that I'm currently speaking from Treaty 7 territory, although I do teach across 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty as well as the Treaty 3 area. And I'm very grateful to be able to have lived and work across all of these territories. So I am a contract faculty. I've been one for about 4 years now, but I still feel very new to it. I do have experiences, unfortunately, of precarity within the workplace, and what Dr. Nakagawa had already mentioned of bouncing around to different departments just to scramble to get courses, the stress of not finding out whether you even get your course maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the term starts. And then the difficulty of actually being able to conduct research. and fulfill other duties, especially when you have no foundational department or when those foundations have been marred by experiences of racism. So those of you who have experienced the precarity of contract work, you understand that there's so much extra work that is required in order to teach new courses, to learn new material, and then also publish or perish. But I'd also like to recognize, of course, I'm very lucky and very privileged to have been able to work and to have gotten work immediately after graduating. I know that others are not so lucky, and that says a lot about precarity and racism in the academy. So what can be done to address it? Unfortunately or fortunately, I've had to find a lot of support outside of the academy with community and community members like Winnie here. But we know that sometimes the academy and community can't always come together, because after all, the academy is still a colonial structure that for the most part tries to uphold values of white supremacy. So I've had to take lessons from others, such as Winnie again, who've taught us solidarity rather than silence. And she's also taught me, and the community has taught me, that there is space within these institutions of higher education. What prevents us from feeling like there's space is the whiteness, right? And the neoliberalism of these so-called spaces of enlightenment, right? So they're incredibly privileged spaces. And for many of us, we are the first generation to obtain our MAs, to obtain our PhDs, to even obtain our undergraduate degrees, which is monumental for our families and for our communities. So that means for many of us, it's the first time we're working within these institutions. So there can be a little bit of that, for lack of a better word, imposter syndrome, or feelings of non-belonging, which is really a systemic and structural issue. I guess in terms of who needs to be at the table, the obvious answer is not all and only white academics and white faculty members, but also for Black, Indigenous, and people of color scholars in positions of assistant professor or associate professor, or in positions of deans. They can help us by not gatekeeping, to come back to a term that Winnie had used. They can help us by not gatekeeping, by not seeing one another as competition, because I'm not your competition, you are not my competition. We already have to compete with this violent system of white supremacy that more or less wants to keep people like us out. And I'm sure for those of you who are in those positions of higher power within the institution, nothing can be scarier than facing the cruelty of white supremacy alone. So I think the more we talk about it in the and talk about these issues in both national and local forums, and it's unfortunate or fortunate that we have to even have these conversations due to the COVID-19 induced anti-Asian racism, having these conversations alleviates or helps us think through the co-constitution of precarious work and racism, in the sense that we get to share resources, we get to share methods of support. I've learned so much from you, Sharoni, and I hope we can keep in touch after this too, because you've given me so much to think about from a union perspective. So it also appears like, obviously, we're all seated at multiple tables. We're seated at many different tables in order to try to figure out how we can change the table of academia. So I think we need people who can help us represent this bigger picture of precarious work and racism, which has made it difficult for many of us, many contract faculty, to be present professors, be present with our students, and of course, it's also not the onus shouldn't only be on Black, Indigenous, and people of color scholars to make space out of what we perceive as already limited space for others. In a sense, we've already kind of touched on this, but it probably requires some kind of institutional overhaul, like an entire institutional overhaul of how we think about the academy, and how we envision our future in it and the future of the next generation of scholars. Like, I feel like I've just entered the academy, but we're already trying to pave a pathway for the next generation of racialized scholars who enter the academy. So I'll just leave it there for now. Thanks, Jamie. But yeah, lots to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. I would like to invite Dr. Habiba Zaman to provide her thoughts now on the link between precarious work and racism and what can be done.
Thank you, Jamie. I respectfully acknowledge that I am living on the ancestral land and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I also like to thank Ryerson University Dean of Arts, Pam Siguman, for inviting me to this panel. And I also thank Dean of Arts support staff and technical staff, especially Natasha Choudhury and Josel Gerardo and all support staff. You have done a fantastic job. I think first I would like to start with an anecdotal story because I am so glad that the Ryerson University has organized this panel, which is timely. But I like to just narrate an anecdotal story that as an assistant professor on tenure track position 2 decades ago, I became a researcher of a multidisciplinary collaborative research project funded by SHARC Canada. When I started to explain my research with Asian immigrants, quote unquote, for the project, one major player of the team remarked, I should not focus on racism, as there are already many published reports, books, journal articles on racism. So realizing the power dynamics in academia, I compiled the questionnaire for the research participants without asking a single question on racism, you imagine. And despite of this quote unquote cautionary effort, diverse forms of racism were unfolded through individual and focus group interviews. The racialized participants, both immigrant and migrant workers, narrated their experiences of racism in multidimensional ways. Discrimination that the participants experienced was based on race, religion, dress, country of origin, and in one case, transgender. So having said so, I like to say that after 2 decades that I have seen that there is just a conference on that precarity and anti-racism or racism, whatever you say. And although that we talk a lot on racism, but in my dark moments, I think racism remains the same, despite of several anti-racist policies in academia. In the 21st century, racism in Canada is hidden, subtle, and sometimes quoted with a few requirements for a specific job for a targeted, privileged person. Having said so, I state that the nature and extent of racism against Asian racialized students vary in terms of size of the cities, neighborhoods, public spaces, universities, and so on. Although we talked a lot about the precarity of sessionals, I have been working as a sessional for years, that before starting my tenure STEAM position, actually those happened as a grad student, I did that. But we did not talk about also the precarity of graduate students, especially racialized students. So I just would like to illustrate the precarity of graduate students during this COVID regime. It will be very brief. Student A was doing their first year of graduate work. They left Canada as their mother died due to COVID. They stayed 1 semester in their country of origin while taking Canvas course and then returned to Canada. Student B was doing second year of graduate work. She stayed in Vancouver for her first and second year Her performance was not good due to violence at home that triggered due to COVID. Student C was doing her first year graduate program via Zoom Canvas while staying in her country of origin. Student C has her spouse and a child. She conceived her second child but lost due to COVID anxieties. Once the first semester was over, student C and their family moved to Canada. Student D was doing advanced level PhD program. Her family in the country of origin got displaced and dispersed because of political turmoil. Student D was unable to visit her family due to COVID and political turmoil for approximately 4 years. In all these cases, these racialized students suffered from anxieties and stresses that triggered several mental health issues. We don't talk about mental health issues when we talk about racism. So this is an area we need to think about that. Further, they encountered financial difficulties and lacked academic support and network during this COVID. During my tenure in academia as a grad student, sessional, contract faculty, as well as a tenured faculty for past 40 years, I have come across several racialized academics whose works informed me about systemic and structural racism. And I think that all of you, that Winnie, Sharoni, Satoru, Angie, that you already touched this issue, systemic and structural racism. I like to just compile few recommendations based on my academic knowledge and experiential knowledge, that be a member of a student union on university campus when you are a student, grad student or undergrad student. Attend meetings of student unions. Receive information regarding your own collective rights. A lot of Asian graduate students, they are not familiar with that, or undergrad students. For example, SFU, GSWS, or Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies, has undergrad student union. And I was also an acting director of Labor Studies program of Simon Fraser University. So I am familiar with that how that union can be effective in students' life, in contract faculty's life, although I know this is a very much slippery slope, but be careful at the same time, be active in students' union. Build up a support network with racialized, indigenous, and non-racialized students. This assists you to receive information beyond racialized groups. Identify progressive, radical, student positive faculty on university campus and build an academic relationship network with them. I did that when I was a graduate student. I was an international student also. Attend seminars, symposiums, and workshops on campus as much as possible. Try to go beyond your own discipline and department. This is one way to identify the like-minded academics, both students and faculty. Attend as well as present to the academic conferences, local, provincial, national, and international. This is one of the best ways to build up supporting network. In my own case, this was the platform where I found feminist, progressive academics, irrespective of their sexual orientation, race, age, ethnicity, religion, ability, indigeneity, and genders, who facilitated to build up my own secured academic trajectory. Build up relationships with local community groups. For example, when I moved to Vancouver approximately 3 decades ago, I became a member of South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy, which is called SANSAD, South Asian Film Education Society, CEFES, India Mahila Association, IMA, Lower Mainland Bengali Culture Association, LMBCS, Greater Vancouver Bangladesh Cultural Association. Honestly speaking, I am not shy, but I am not a person that who goes out, to build up that network over cup of tea or anything. I never had that time because I had some kind of responsibility to my 2 young children who were born and raised in Canada, and I have a spouse who traveled internationally all the time. So my time was always tight. Through this networking, through just attending the meetings and everything, I think I unconsciously built up a lot of networks who always provided me that information and all kinds of support, regarding not only my career, but also in other ways, to
Thank you, Dr. Zaman. Yeah.
everything confirmed and everything tenured and that load. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you so much for your comments. I think there's some very rich, comments on building community and seeking support and being proactive, and also I'll call on to support those in your community. We only have a few minutes left, and already, the time has gone by very, very quickly, but I wanted to invite our panelists to provide a 1-minute final comment, and especially for those of you that spoke earlier on in the session about any reflections you had on what your fellow panelists said, or any thoughts that you didn't have time to convey that you would like to right now. So I'll start again in order with Dr. Nakagawa. If you could give us just 1 minute of your final thoughts on what your colleagues have.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay, sure. I'll try my best. I like the idea of what we need to deconstruct the university, and we need to talk about the solution that I would say is each one of us who has academic background to write our future generation so that they can use to fight. So that I don't fall into the position of the self-protection, self-preservation, self-greed, right? So that's not what I want to do, and I get a hit, sure, and I don't want to leave that one to the next generation. I think that would be one of the solutions. It's too general and too optimistic, maybe you say, but whatever we learn, the say on the paper will not disappear, but what we don't get here may not be heard, but that's what maybe we should do. So I'll tag along with everybody. Yeah, right. Thank you.
Dr. Nakagawa. I'd like to invite Sharoni Mitra now to provide her final thoughts on what your panelists have conveyed.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated some of the latter points on, I guess for lack of a better word, coping strategies, and also finding your people within these spaces. Because it can feel like there's no space, and it's hard to find your comrades out there, but in a personal sense, that's such a powerful part of our political and personal endeavors, and kind of forced me to reflect on too on who my own folks have been in grad school, and the kind of resilience they cultivate, and the sort of funny and twisted forms of hope you have in these kind of David and Goliath situations. So thank you for those who pointed that out.
Thank you, Sharoni. I invite Dr. Angie Wong now.
Well, this is not the first time we've been here, right? We've been here before, right? We've been here before, and like sometimes when you're the only racialized scholar, you're the only Asian scholar in a department or in a hallway, it can feel very lonely. So I really appreciate, Habiba, you encouraging us to go out to broader intellectual, scholarly, and community networks in order to find that support, because there are other people out there experiencing the same struggles. So we can find that network of support. And I certainly hope that even after this conference is over, we can still find support with one another, beyond this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Dr. Winnie Ng.
Yeah, thank you very much for the session, and my apology for joining a bit late due to technical difficulty. I guess in the context, as Asian members of Asian Canadian communities, we are either seen as the model minorities or the perpetual foreigners, right? And it takes a virus just to bring all the racist prejudice up to the surface and explode into manifest in different ways. And that's why, to me, I think it's important, and I want to reinforce that point about conducting, getting the leadership of the institutions and union leadership to commit more resources in conducting qualitative and quantitative research that would give the experience, that would make our experiences visible, right? And to me, then that would become the ammunition we need for the next step to do the action plan. And to me, I see this conference as the beginning of a process following UBC and now at Ryerson. And it shouldn't be taken as a check marks that we have done it, but what's gonna happen in between conferences and in between national dialogues. And to me, I think this is where reinforcing my point is we don't need more consultations, we need action plan. And that's where, resources and commitment to collaborate among the administrations, the union leadership, and all the equity-seeking members needs to come together. To map out a plan. I would hate to be at the same spot 5 years from now, doing the same thing, and it probably will, but I'm hoping it will be at a different level. And to me, I think this is where we don't need affirmative strategies, we need structural solutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winnie Ng. And finally, but not least, Dr. Habiba Zaman.
Yes, my conclusive comment is that racism, heterosexism, transphobia, sexism, ageism, classism, and ableism function in a myriad form in a society. I am not assuming all forms of oppression are consistent, unified, and equal in their effects. Constructing hierarchies of various oppression is also problematic sometimes. This may also create a fragmented as well as divisive progressive movement for creating a just society. Simultaneously, I am also looking forward to the outcome of this provocative kind of that conference, that's precarity and anti-racism. Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, everyone. If there's anything that I take away from this very important panel is, the courageous and brave words that you spoke from your own experiences. I thank you all for sharing that and for putting yourself so bravely out there, and perhaps that people who are joining us today can take this as a reminder to reach out to those around us who may be in a precarious work situation, especially to our racialized colleagues, as a reminder for all of us to incorporate this, especially for those of us in more permanent tenure track or in leadership positions, to build this into our everyday work and our practice. I certainly will take that forward from this panel and will remind myself of that. And I hope others do today too. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your experiences, your stories, and most importantly, your knowledge and your expertise on racism, precarity in the academic workplace. Thank you, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of this forum.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you again in another forum. Good luck with your efforts and everything, and you will do well.
Thank you.
Solidarity.
Thank you.